I'm Perry Bacon. I'm the host of the New Republic show right now. Happy Thanksgiving, or hope you're back. Hope you're excited to be back from Thanksgiving break. And I'm honored to be joined this afternoon now, by Moira Donegan. She's a great columnist at The Guardian, writes a lot of really interesting pieces, both about what's happening with Trump and the Republican Party, but also the Democrats. She's a great overall analyst of what's happening in American politics. So thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Perry. That's very kind of you. It's good to be here.
Great to see you. So I want to start with kind of like, if you'd asked me in August, when the National Guard seemed like they were being deployed everywhere, and universities and other institutions were folding a lot, where I felt like American democracy was on a scale of 1 to 10, how worried I was, I might have said like a 9. It felt like things were really, really bad, and I might be down to a 7 right now. It feels like there are more constraints on Trump than there were, and more, both the Democrats in Congress, judges, a lot more people feel like they're opposing him than before. But talk to me about how you feel. Are we in a better place in August, or maybe not?
I think some of the weaknesses that are kind of inherent to Trump in his second term are becoming a little more obvious now. That does not mean that we are out of the woods, right? I think the Trump era has ushered in a sort of like slow but real set of like changes to the constitutional paradigm and empowerment of the executive that is not going to be eliminated just because Trump seems to be in a degree of personal decline. But that decline is becoming kind of hard to ignore. I think the government shutdown was actually quite damaging for Donald Trump.
Okay.
I think, the persistence of high prices, particularly now exacerbated as some of his tariffs go into effect, that has been bad for Trump. The very cynical reception which the Supreme Court case about those tariffs got at oral argument sort of fractured the notion that, all of these Republican politicians and political operatives, among which I do count the Supreme Court justices, or at least the majority of them, are sort of, in a state of permanent and absolute obedience to Donald Trump. That's beginning to crack, right? And I think in the 2 weeks or so since the elections this year, they're off-year elections. Party out of power tends to be a great deal more motivated in the elections. I will give the responsible caveat that we're kind of limited in what we can deduce from what happened a couple weeks ago. But those were real Democratic wipeouts, right?
Yeah.
And that has been partnered with some real internal fracturing within the MAGA coalition in the ranks below Donald Trump, both as, the contradictions of that coalition are sort of like forced into light. And also, I think, as some of these more ambitious MAGA Republicans start to look towards their own post Trump future and start to try and position themselves to be best, situated to ascend further after the old man exits the stage.
So I'll stop. A couple things there. You're not required to give a 1 to 10, but on the authoritarian scale, would you want to give a number?
I think I'm with you. I think I'm about a 7 or an 8.
Okay.
I think this is still pretty bad, right?
Yeah.
And I think the sort of post-Trump effort to rebuild something like a liberal democracy, or something beyond a liberal democracy that has similar aspirations towards, a pluralist society of equals,
Yeah.
is going to be a generational fight. And I really don't want to be like, oh, it's fine that he's a
No,
doddering old idiot. Like his advisors are turning on him. It's all over. I don't think that's really true.
I agree.
Um, and I think that we could still see Donald Trump reconsolidate his control over the Republican Party. But I think you can't really look at the past month or two and think that he has as much control now as he did in, say, February, or those moments in the months following the 2024 election, when there was this fantasy, I think, both among a lot of Republicans and in a lot of like media commentators and, people with institutional power, that, Trump represented this mass sort of will of the Volk that couldn't be contradicted. Now it seems like contradicting him is much more possible.
Because use the term, if he could reconsolidate power in the Republican Party, assuming, and so you're now suggesting right now he does not have, because he does not have total power in that party. You'd say right now.
Yeah, I think Donald Trump is a little bit out to lunch as the president. He is really showing his age. Reports like a very interesting piece that came out in the Atlantic today are indicating that he is kind of isolated personally. He is not doing the kind of big rallies that he did all through his first term. He's not appearing in public as often. And when he does appear in public, he looks old. He looks like a much older man than he did in 2016, 2017, right? The stress of the presidency, the passage of time, these have had visible effects on a man who was never very robustly physically healthy to begin with, right? So I think what you have is a president who is occupying a kind of figurehead position, and then some very powerful but not very accountable people within his administration who are doing the actual work of governing. So I'm thinking particularly of people like Russ Voigt and Stephen Miller.
Yeah.
You have a really, I don't know, for lack of a better term, castrated Congress who are not getting the kind of handouts and favors that would make it easy for them to remain loyal to Trump, even at the kind of political cost. We're seeing a lot of scandals that are damaging Donald Trump, even within his own coalition. And among those, I'm thinking of continued high prices and cost of living issues, which are, it's an old song, but it's a good one. It's true that people do not like feeling like they can't afford a comfortable life or the life that they aspire to, right? And that's something he ran on in 2024 and has not delivered on. But also, Jeffrey Epstein is not staying dead. That guy is really haunting the Trump presidency, and that 2024 campaign really relied on these forces of paranoia and conspiracism, and this harnessed anti-elite energy that Donald Trump no longer seems like a credible avatar for. And you have people who I do not think you have to hand it to. People who are
Let me stop
quite.
you. Are we talking about one crazy woman from Georgia? Is that I don't want?
I'm
I'm
talking. I'm
leery of
talking about
putting
a crazy
two.
lady
Who's
from
your side? Who's your
Georgia
other?
and a crazy lady from Colorado. I'm talking about Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert,
Right. Okay. Yeah.
who have both broken with the president on
Yes.
Epstein and Greene very dramatically. Greene is a complicated figure,
Yes.
who seems to now quite robustly no longer understand her own interests as being in alignment with President Trump, right? But I also think it's a trick to ask about these people: are they genuinely crazy or are they cynical? Because
We'll
that
never
it's
know. It doesn't
both.
really matter. Yeah, both. Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's often both.
Yeah.
But I think you do have some of these people who got elected to Congress who are true believers in QAnon and true believers in the idea of Donald Trump in 2020, 2019 as this quasi messianic figure. And his physical physical decline and the mounting evidence of his at minimum cooperation or sort of blithe acceptance of Jeffrey Epstein's conduct has really given some of them what I think is not only a moment of cynical reevaluation of their own self-interest, but a genuine crisis of faith in some cases, right? And I don't think that's just happening in the strange minds in the likes of Marjorie Taylor Greene or Lauren Boebert. I think that's happening to a lot of people who were, radicalized on Facebook during the pandemic, who are now wondering, well, this belief system that was very morally animating to me is now, has continued to be sort of contradicted by facts in ways that are accumulating to the extent that I can no longer ignore it. If that makes sense. So I think his base is fracturing, his coalition is fracturing, and he's spending a lot of time doing stuff that doesn't seem to be helping. He's throwing Gatsby parties at Mar-a-Lago during the government shutdown. He seems to spend like kind of a majority of his time on the ballroom build. And the destruction of the East Wing, I think, did kind of have a symbolic hit in a way that maybe some people didn't expect it to. He seems to be interested in, old man projects, like retiree stuff. That seems to be his personal preoccupations. So the question of who is actually in control of policy is another matter because it doesn't seem to be the elected representatives in Congress, and it doesn't seem to be personally Donald Trump. It seems to be this set of people in the Trump administration
Marco
who
Rubio
have
does foreign policy. Stephen Miller does immigration.
yeah,
Russ Vogt does. I think there is
domestic,
a.
yeah.
It does seem like we're in a place where the president is not in charge of much and doesn't seem to be engaged with, which was maybe true the last 5 years. I mean, the whole 5 years, but it seems like it's more pronounced now. Is that what we're getting at here?
Yeah, I think it's hard for these people who really invested a lot of hope and a lot of symbolism in Donald Trump the man, in the
Yeah.
figure of Donald Trump as this person who could, deliver restored greatness and prosperity to white America. They are not getting that, and it's harder to believe in that when you see this doddering old man who's playing golf and talking about his home renovation.
Um, when I was at the Washington Post, I wrote a lot of columns. I was the sort of Democrat who was critical of the Democrats, and I wrote a lot of pieces. You would often write something similar to me, but a little better, I always thought, in terms of like
Oh,
making those critiques. But one thing you said was I have found a lot of the Democratic Party strategy the last 4 years, 10 years, and really earlier this year to be pretty bad and pretty ineffective. But we think that the government shut down, even though we all criticized it for ending too early. You seem to say just a minute ago the government shutdown seemed to drive his poll numbers down. Do we think that the Democratic Party, Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer did something smart? Are we going to have to say that?
don't make me hand it to Hakeem Jeffries.
Yeah, I think you might have to think about it. Yeah.
There is a genuine change happening very slowly inside the Democratic Party,
Uh-huh.
where they are beginning to reassess, I think, some of their, former approaches to Trump, which was very much just like, let him hang himself, right?
Yes.
Like, we're gonna step back, we're gonna let him be a distracting mess in front of the public, and the public will understand him to be incompetent and unworthy of his office, and then they will restore us to power. That hasn't really played out great, right? The Democrats do best when they affirmatively attack Trump and when they try to press on his weaknesses, right?
Mhm.
I criticized them at the time for ending the shutdown within a week of those elections. I thought it looked cynical.
Yeah.
I thought it looked weak. I thought they could have extended their time. But, I do think what you have to hand it to them on is reviving, especially in the House, reviving the Epstein issue as soon as they got back into session,
Mhm.
that was it is dark that we are talking about the rape of girls as a political football. This is a symbol of our own moral degradation, I think, and at the same time, it was very strategically useful because that is a issue that genuinely fractures his coalition and genuinely makes a lot of Donald Trump's supporters, including some like very important supporters in this like alternative media sphere and in Congress, think differently about him and wonder if they can trust him. And that was smart of them. They changed and controlled the media narrative in that first week after the end of the shutdown, that they in a way that they had not done in quite some time.
So his approval rating, I think, is in 35% in some polls. I think the average is in the 40s, low 40s, I guess, still now. Do we think this is a permanent situation? It's going to keep going? Because I think that's part of what people are perceiving. One of my colleagues used the phrase lame duck in a piece, and he's president for 3 years, so he's not a lame duck policy-wise, but do we see this continuing? I mean, I wonder, I guess the question is, George W. Bush ended up in the high 20s, I think. Do we think that's possible anymore? Or do we think that he's got a floor of 38% of people who are very MAGA?
I think about a third of the country is pretty firmly MAGA, right?
Yeah.
that has been eroding. I think it is genuinely eroding.
Okay.
The real problem for MAGA right now is that they do not have a clear successor, right? The logical next candidate in 2028, aside from Trump himself, which seems to be something that not many Republicans are really biting on. I actually think that Mike Johnson's.
They do have a line. I didn't know. This is the line they will not cross. Thankfully,
Yeah,
I
they
guess.
or
Yeah.
they I think they're kind of done with it, honestly. I think
They
they're
think so too.
exhausted. Yeah, he's
Yeah.
not treating them well.
Right.
If he was giving them more treats and more rewards
Or if it was
for their
67% in the
cooperation.
polls, I think that'd also be different. If he was
Yeah.
clearly very popular, it would help too. But anyway, yeah.
Yeah. Like the next in line is JD Vance.
Yeah.
And JD Vance does not have the charisma that Donald Trump has. I will hand it to Donald Trump. He's funny. He at his peak, he really knew how to work a crowd. He has an instinct for how to channel and weaponize grievance.
Yes.
JD Vance lacks this. He is not charming. He is not particularly likable. He is like preternaturally unfunny. It's like watching JD Vance try to make a joke. It's like seeing a dog walk on its hind legs. It's unnatural. And his unlikability is combined with the fact that he has chosen sides, I think, with a degree of plausible deniability, but pretty legibly, in an internal MAGA fight
Mhm.
over the sort of parameters of the white supremacy that they want to advance, right?
Right.
JD Vance, something else that happened over the past couple months that I think has weakened the MAGA coalition is the fight inside the Heritage Foundation and inside the MAGA movement more broadly over the extent to which they should integrate Nick Fuentes and open anti-Semitism, right? Anti-Semitism is its own intellectual tradition on the right, but I think it opens up a particular vulnerability within a MAGA-style white supremacist coalition. Because if you can do what the Nick Fuentes and the Tucker Carlsons want to do and exclude Jews from whiteness, that kind of exposes whiteness itself, not as this sort of solid promise that the MAGA movement wants to extend to white people, but as actually like a contingent thing that has internal contradictions, right? So if Jews aren't white anymore, why not the Poles?
Right.
Why not the Italians? Why not the Irish? These like inter-ethnic, intra-white grievances and rivalries
Mhm.
can come back into the fore in a way that I think is really weakening for a white supremacist coalition, right? You can start pulling on that like thread in the sweater and unravel the whole thing pretty quickly. It also means that like you lose a lot of the Jewish intellectuals who have been like the forefront of the neocon movement that's trying to reassert itself now, right? You lose a lot of people who, I guess to their credit, are actually morally repulsed by anti-Semitism. You lose this older guard of people who are trying to maintain a sheen of patrician decency on the right in the Trump era when you bring in these Nazi kids from the internet. And it's distasteful, it's gross. They don't want to do it. And JD Vance has really like chosen a side. He's on the Groyper side. And that stuff, I don't know that they can win an election on it. I'm a pretty cynical person in terms of like the id of the American electorate, but I think people are put off by it. I don't think they can really build a governing coalition on the Groyper idea.
I think I'm going to stop there because I think in part I'm beginning to think he's maybe not the person to be the candidate in the first place, and therefore I don't want to spend too much time. We're gonna probably have a whole
Who do
primary, and I
you
don't know if
think?
JD Vance is going to win the primary. So I think that I have no idea. It seems to me there's an opening for somebody else in 2013. I did not think Donald Trump would. The point being there might be more of an opening because of the Republican Party may assess JD Vance as not overwhelmingly popular either. Let me switch to the Democrats. So we've had this interesting discourse on the Democratic side, which has been post-election. There's a big panic, and therefore a lot of openness to new ideas. A lot of which has been prominent people, I would say, punching left more or less, like
Mhm.
Democrats too woke, etc., said it in various ways at various conferences and in various books. So that's been a lot of this. So I guess, which I have not loved, but I guess to connect what we said, we're talking a little earlier. is the case that the Democratic Party needs to be reformed from the left, from the center, from the right, from the bottom up? Is all of that kind of I think Hakeem Jeffries might be more centrist than me, but I think more than anything else, he wants to change as little as possible about the party. And I wonder, can the party now is the reckoning in the party over, and to some extent because Donald Trump is now unpopular and they can sort of plug and play as they usually do.
Yeah, I think the stakes have become lower for the Democratic Party's like ongoing identity crisis as Donald Trump's unpopularity and the reality of his governments becomes more like politically salient, right?
Yeah.
So I think the Democrats are going to do what they were kind of always going to do, which is adopt policy positions that fit the districts in which their candidates are running, right?
Yeah.
And I think there's some commonalities you can find between the two poles of the spectrum that you hear talk about lately, which is like Zoran Mamdani in New York and Abigail Spanberger in Virginia. The sort of like white woman from like the national security establishment, right wing as far as the Democrats go, like a centrist, right? Like a centrist, like accommodationist sort of politician. Both ran against Donald Trump, like pretty specifically, right? Both campaigned on his unpopularity. And both, talked about affordability, and both were like, significantly younger than some of the major figures of the party. I think part of what's happening is a generational shift. You saw a real unwillingness of the sort of centrist boomer coalition that kind of came to political maturity during the first Clinton administration to retire, to let go of their coalitions. And time has sort of forced their hand, right? Biden was forced out of the race. Nancy Pelosi finally retired. I think Chuck Schumer is probably is really showing his age and might not seek another 6-year term. So I think there is room finally that is being made for a newer kind of face of the party and for newer talents to emerge and try to find their lane. I do think that there is a left energy in the Democratic Party, particularly among people like under 40, uh, which is going to be reflected in that generational change and is going to be harnessed in specific districts to some success, right? Like the Zoran Mamdani victory in New York City is a victory, particularly that primary victory, is a victory of the Democratic Socialists of America, New York City chapter, right?
Mhm.
That is a group that it was very easy to write off
Right.
as sort of like internally fractious and a little bit useless a couple years ago. And they seem to have matured enough, at least to pull off like a real political coup.
Right.
Uh, and that was something that, I don't know if you'll see them do that again, but they might begin to flex a little more muscle at the local level in specific cities, right? You're not going to probably get a DSA Duluth, although if
Right.
you're
Right.
if you're in the DSA Duluth, like don't yell at me. But
Okay.
there are pockets where the far left will begin to come into greater political maturity,
Yes.
right? I think
Yes.
the boomer leftists, your Elizabeth Warrens, your Bernie Sanders, I think we can maybe see them almost in like a John the Baptist kind of role, right?
Yeah.
They were laying the
That's
groundwork
good. Well put.
for
Yeah.
what's going to come and be a more mature political movement. But it's the American left has been decimated for a long time. It's going to be a slow rebuild.
Because I guess I read a piece about how Warren and Sanders, and there was a piece right before Thanksgiving in the Times about how Warren and Sanders and Van Hollen are setting up some kind of like fight harder caucus, and they're going to push for Flatner, who I'm with you don't love. There's a candidate in Minnesota who is more progressive and without the scandals. I think her name is Flanagan.
Mhm.
There's a couple more progressive candidates in Michigan running against the more moderate candidates. I think there are going to be these sort of intra-party ideological fights, and I wonder if I had thought about this in like March or April, I thought these fights are over, where the party should go, and so on. And now it feels like those fights are much less, um, perhaps much less of an indication of where Democrats are going because they can just run against Trump in every place. They can win a lot of places just that way, right?
Yeah, I think that there's a degree to which they certainly ran against Trump and won by saying we're not Trump and Trump is making your life harder and we'll try and stop him. In 2025, a
And
lot can
moderates and
change.
progressives can run on that platform, and there's not really
Yes.
much difference there. Yeah,
Yes. Yeah.
yeah.
I will also say that like some of what has encouraged me is that in 2025 you didn't really see Democrats doing what they normally do, which is fight the last war, right?
Yes.
I think if they had followed the playbook that they were being encouraged to follow in 2025, you would have seen a bunch of Democratic candidates running ads like, I won't let boys on your daughter's, field hockey team
Oh,
or
you're
whatever.
saying that Spamberger and Mikey Sherrill did not run the
No,
most popular, whatever third way popular. There was a lot of room they could have ran on that. They did not go as far as you and I might have feared last December. They did not sound like
yeah.
Seth Moulton. No, guessing at your point. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. And I think also something that I've taken is that when culture war issues play for the Republicans, they play in a very specific way,
yeah,
right? So, like that ad that Trump did, which was like kind of a devastatingly effective ad. Kamala is for they, them,
yeah,
Trump is for you.
yeah,
That was a culture war grievance. That was sort of like a sexual difference and bigotry grievance
yeah.
wielded for a material concern,
Yes.
right? It was an us versus them is a evocation of the elites,
They don't
right?
care about high prices. They care about helping their elite friend. Yeah, yeah. Okay, right, right.
Right,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And
Smart.
for you means he's gonna like lower your grocery bill,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
right. Right.
Like he's gonna not do this, supposedly silly trans stuff, and he's gonna focus on what really matters, right? You could actually read that ad as bigoted as it was, and I do not want to understate that, but you could read that ad as mocking Democrats for the supposed triviality of their cultural war
Yes,
issues,
yes,
right?
yes. Right.
I just don't think that there's that many people. Clearly, they're out there and they're dangerous, but I don't think there's that many people who are motivated day to day by
Yeah.
contempt for trans Americans. And I do not think that you can win people over just by moving to where you think that they are on cultural war stuff, right? And that's like the thermostatic, the trying to chase the middle on the culture war stuff makes people it makes you look cynical. It makes you look like you don't believe in anything, right? When Spamberger and Mom Donnie and these women winning candidates refused to do that, it looked more like they had had a sense of principles, but really had a sense of priorities. It's like I'm focused on affordability was Mondami's answer to every single question he was asked, Um, and so I think one way that Democrats have begun to evolve that I'm encouraged by is sort of choosing the questions that they want to answer,
Yes.
like choosing their own messaging priorities as opposed to constantly chasing whatever the Republican attack was and being on the defensive and fighting on the territory that has been given to them as opposed to the territory they chose.
And I think if I was going to, I'll phrase put it differently, but instead of moving, my worry was they were going to move to the right on cultural issues. And it seems to me that they've kept their same positions while leading with economics. And that's probably that maybe been a better course. And maybe Kamala, to be fair, Kamala did some of that herself, but it may be the context is different now.
Yeah, I think Kamala. I'll be a Kamala defender. I think she got kind
I
of
was
screwed.
going to say that. Yes,
Yeah,
that's how
I
I'm
don't.
beginning to feel myself. Yes.
I don't think she had a real opportunity in the very short amount of time she had to campaign, to carve out a separate identity from Joe Biden.
Yes.
She also was not willing to break from Joe Biden on several important issues. But I don't know exactly how much of a chance she had. I think her political career is over. I do not think she should try to run again. I think she should make a lot of money giving speeches to Goldman Sachs or whatever people do after they've been the vice president.
You
And
don't really mean Goldman Sachs, but I get the point. Yeah, yeah. Maybe,
well,
maybe, yes, yes,
she should exit, I think,
yes.
electoral politics.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but that's because she's tainted by the unpopularity of somebody else. Um,
It's a good place to finish. Actually, one more question is, and I'll let you go. Is okay. So if you ask me in 2024, mid 2024, I was a big hyping for Gretchen Whitmer would be a great candidate to run.
Hmm.
Someone like that would be great. She's a woman, she's appealing. Like if you had asked me who should replace Biden, I would have said Harris is dragged down by their ticket. Maybe you pick somebody, Andy Bashir, Whitmer. I could pick a few other people about that now. But I have to confess, I'm curious where you think things stand now, because after 2025, having this whole year finish, Gavin Newsom has been not somebody I normally like. Has been your governor has been better than I thought and led more than I thought. And Whitmer has spent a lot of the year doing the "let me show you how bipartisan stuff I am." Shapiro is in that box a little bit too of "let me show you how much I reach the other side while they destroy the country." So, in other words, like who do you like? Right, I know it's a long term. Anybody you've been impressed by in terms of 2028? Anybody you've been particularly disappointed by? Because Whitmer's on my list of people I wanted to be excited by and am not, and Newsom and Pritzker are on my list of people who have like led this year and who've made me feel better about them.
Yeah, I'm gonna be honest with you, Perry. When I think about another Democratic primary, I just want to put my head in my hands and hide until 20, late 2028. I think I think that you have Democrats trying to square their local obligations with their national reputations,
Yeah,
right? So, like, Pritzker, I think you're right that, Pritzker has been, like, a interesting leader. I think the way he got Donald Trump to back down on a more aggressive National Guard deployment to Chicago was very impressive.
yeah,
Um, Pritzker is also the leader of a very blue state, right?
yeah.
Um, Gavin Newsom, I think he's kind of got his finger in the air trying to see which way the wind is blowing, and sometimes that blows him in directions that I like, and sometimes it doesn't. But I don't really totally trust him to have a core set of principles, which I think is
All right.
symptomatic of a kind of like older
Yeah.
like Democratic problem. But
He's not
he is
that old, right?
also
He's in his 50s. He's not actually old. He just sort of thinks old in a certain. He's been around for a while, but I don't think he's actually that old.
yeah,
I'll have to look it up.
He's a Gen X
Yeah,
guy with
yeah,
a
yeah,
with a boomer mentality.
yeah,
And he is again the leader of a very blue state,
yeah, yeah,
right? And
yeah.
he is being more aggressive because he has the leeway to do that within his state. Whitmer really disappointed me in the first, 6, 8 months of the Trump
This is what I'm
presidency.
referring to. Yeah, yeah,
She was an excellent, aggressive, progressive leader of Michigan
yeah.
during the first Trump
Right.
and Biden terms.
Yes,
Was, I thought, really skillful in handling the post-Dobbs fallout
yes.
in her state. And
Glad you
then,
said that. I'll give her some more. I'll come back to her. Okay, I'm not going to rule her out. I'm glad you said that. She's
but
been
you're
really
right.
good. Yeah,
She made the mistake a lot of people made in that post-2024 era, where she thought Trump represented something really significant
yes, right. You
and
sort of
overestimated
overreacted.
his power. She's
Yeah,
also responding to her state, which is not very blue,
I
right?
agree. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and so this is something that I think, everybody is accumulating liabilities as they go through. And I don't have a pick right now. I
Yeah,
think it's kind of an open field.
yeah,
I will say, like, there's basically nobody who seems like a viable candidate for that nomination who I would be thrilled with right now. They've got a couple years to change that,
yeah.
and I hope they
Okay.
try.
Okay. And with that, that's a great place to end. Thanks for joining me. This was a lot of fun. I appreciate it. Be
Thank
in
you
touch.
so much, Perry. It was a blast.
Good to see you. Bye bye.